I thank all of you for joining in and welcome each one of you for this webinar, the one of the webinars in the web series of webinar that we've been conducting over the last couple of months. So this webinar is specifically around how do we manage and automate the entire certificate management within a hybrid environment within the organizations, as you know, everything with regard to digital transformation and with regard to cybersecurity is evolving, and it's changing so rapidly, and threats are increasing so rapidly. It's time that we all take cognizance of all of these. So with that, and also really position ourselves as an advisor in this changing environments or in this evolving cybersecurity environment, right? So with this context, let me introduce myself. I'm Jishnu. I'm the Vice President for Middle East and Africa Channels and Alliances. Joined by Scott Rea, who will be the lead presenter for the day, who will be taking you through the entire webinar. I'll just give you a quick introduction about Scott. Scott is currently the Executive Vice President and the strategic advisor for a lot of our global initiatives. Scott comes with about 25 plus years of experience in developing businesses, managing relationships, driving a lot of the key initiatives around industry leading practices, around managing public key infrastructure projects and trust related services. So very interesting thing about Scott is most of us who are here in UAE will know about UAE Pass. So Scott has been part of the ideation, part of the implementation. He's also the system integrator who was responsible for this as part of Digital Trust. So he headed the national PKI for the UAE before this assignment, and probably till the time you joined us, Scott. And then he has also been involved in the development and the deployment of Iraq National PKI, set up the operations center here for the operations for Digital Trust, as a commercial certifying authority here in UAE. Prior to that, he was also with the government educations department at or the educations relations at DigiCert, a leading US-based commercial CA, which is in Utah, the US. And Scott has been a PKI architect with the Dartmouth College, where he also operated the Higher Education Bridge Certification Authority as well. So with a very, very extensive experience of over close to 3 decades, Scott has been involved in a number of policy initiatives, a number of key deployment for nationwide initiatives as well. And I think one of the key things that he's very proud of is he's a father of 9 children and grandfather of 10 children. So, Scott, impressive, and over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction, Jishnu. Yeah, I've been involved with PKI and trust and identity for many decades, and certainly more recently in the Middle East, currently focused more in our US initiatives, etc., but also an eye, as Jishnu said, on a global basis. So without further ado, I think we'll get into our presentation around some of the benefits or some of the challenges that we might have, actually. First of all, around the great advent that we have of technology that's available today. It's fantastic, but it also comes with certain risks. We want to highlight some of those and then talk about some of the tools that we may need to deploy in order to protect ourselves against this. So let me share my presentation here. So we're going to talk about certificates and automating those in the hybrid environment that we currently operate within. So as I was mentioning earlier, we do have a fantastic environment that we operate in today with easy access, convenient access, availability all the time to data and systems, due to the expanding capabilities of networks and infrastructure that support that. But that landscape of fantastic availability and convenience also comes with a corresponding potential expanded attack surface for entities that are not friendly towards ourselves or the assets that we're trying to protect. And they means that we need to be more vigilant in the way in which we manage data, information, and services that we might be responsible for and are making available to the populace at large. So, whilst in fairly regulated industries or in the web PKI, for TLS, protecting websites, there are fairly stringent regulations and guidelines around how to manage things like digital certificates, which protect those communications. Oftentimes, the same protocols, the TLS protocols that are used internally don't necessarily get the same attention as those that are maybe publicly facing. And so that can become a blind spot or an area of weakness potentially that we need to pay attention to, because attackers, they're not going to come try to crash down through your front gate, which might be heavily protected. They're going to try to find wherever you might have a weak spot, and something that you're not paying close attention to, that they can exploit and find their way inside your organization. And so internal websites and various other parts of the environment may not be as rigorously protected and monitored potentially as, say, some of the stuff that might be more publicly facing for our organization. Now, also, one of the challenges that we find with, generally speaking, with enterprises releasing information or providing services is that most of the devices or the firewalls or the network infrastructure that is being relied upon is still using, in a lot of cases, password-based authentication. Now, password-based authentication is proving increasingly not resistant to the types of attacks that are available, and we certainly need to find better mechanisms of securing transactions or securing the way in which authentication occurs than through passwords, because it's actually one of the weakest mechanisms that we have. Now, thankfully, we have lots of good ways to strengthen that, and certificates certainly is one of those. We're going to talk about why moving away from a password or moving into a passwordless environment and moving more to something like certificates is important. And whilst that is important, it's not the be all and end all, because even when you move into certificates, there still has to be some due diligence around how those certificates are managed. And we'll talk about ways and applications that eMudhra has that allows us to manage those certificates, etc. One of the other things that is increasing is the penalties when we don't follow regulations and privacy laws enacted around the globe, or perhaps in the region in which you're operating, may have an impact on you if you don't follow a rigorous or take appropriate steps to secure data. You may find not only did you lose the confidence of your potential customers or partners, but you may also find yourself being fined by the appropriate regulating authority because you didn't appropriately take steps to secure the data that was required by regulation. And so we're seeing a proliferation of breaches causing not only damage and cost from the breach itself, but actually the penalties that comes from the regulating authority in not having appropriate steps in place to reasonably prevent that breach from happening. And so that's also another consideration that should drive us away from weak authentication mechanisms like passwords and into something as strong or more strong like certificate-based authentication, etc. And then from the environments that we now work in, it's not a traditional environment anymore where we used to think of enterprise systems being maybe a fort in the desert, and our enterprise is the fort, and anything inside our walls we're comfortable with, and that's what we're protecting, and anything that's outside our walls is what we're trying to protect against. And that's why one of the um, typical mechanisms that we use to create those barrier we call firewalls, because that's the purpose of what they do, is to keep the entities that we don't necessarily trust outside, and create an environment inside for those that we do trust. But one of the challenges that we have in today's hyper-connected world is that we don't really have those boundaries anymore. With the advent of cloud and mobile, etc., there really has been the dissolving of that boundary. For the enterprise, it's now more of a virtual boundary rather than a physical boundary. And most of our employees, or it could be visitors or contractors, our partners, etc., they are inside of our networks and connecting through the capabilities of mobile and cloud, etc. The inside is really outside. The outside is inside. And so we have a far more complex environment that we need to traverse. Now, that complexity can actually create some challenges, but those challenges can be overcome if we're doing appropriate authentication and identify what resource or individual or service is actually connecting to us. As long as we can do appropriate identification of those services and operate in what's known as a zero trust paradigm. So in a zero trust paradigm, doesn't mean that you're in an environment where you're creating zero trust, but it's recognition that you're in an environment where initially you have a base assumption that there's zero trust, and then you verify who it is that you're actually interacting with. And so key to making that happen is being able to do strong authentication verification processes and ensuring that the right people have the right access to the right resources in the right context, and that access is available when it's needed or on a continuous basis with at least as friction as possible. So if we can do that identity piece, and we have credentials then that bind identity, and we validate identity every time we're involved, like I said, with a default assumption of zero trust, and then we do the validation, then we can move in an environment where there may be zero trust to start with, and we can actually enable strong trust across the enterprise. And it doesn't matter the complexity of the environment that we're dealing with, whether it's internal, external, cloud, mobile, etc. Doesn't matter, as long as we are taking the appropriate steps to identify and authenticate who it is that's accessing and whether they should have access to the resources that's been requested, etc. Now, if we're going to rely upon passwords as the mechanism for identity, that's actually a relatively weak binding of identity when you use passwords, because it's difficult to know perhaps when a password has been shared with somebody else or when a password has been compromised. And as I'll show later on, one of the challenges with passwords and why they're considered weak is they probably account for well over 50% of why breaches occur. It's because that password has been compromised, whether it has been shared or released, or whether it's actually been guessed, etc. This is one of the reasons why a lot of breaches actually happen. So moving away from passwords to something that's stronger, like digital certificates, for instance, is one way to mitigate part of that risk. But as I said, it's only part of the story. Once you've moved there, you've taken steps to massively close one of the attack vector, or the largest or the broadest attack vector that is open to malicious entities today, to enterprise resources. But if you don't then manage the corresponding certificates that you've used to appropriately, you can still create issues. And so, part of what we will be sharing today is software, services, a suite that we have that enables the appropriate management of certificates to ensure that when you move to something that's stronger and you're taking those steps to protect the organization and have strong authentication that's cryptographically bound, is to manage that cryptographic keys and the corresponding authenticators, which are the certificates that are used to verify who you are. So again, just pointing out that today's attack surface is quite broad. We have a diverse set of users who are using a diverse set of mechanisms to access a diverse set of devices and services that could be hosted in a diverse or a hybrid environment. It may be some of your on-prem services, or it may be some cloud services. It might be interspersed with mobile, etc. And so it's quite a complex environment to be negotiated. And as noted here from the Google Cloud Threat report from last year, 80% of breaches involved stolen credentials, and credential issues accounted for 60% of the compromises. Now, the other statistic is that the passwords were the major feature of that. So when you're using a credential that's password based, it was the major reason why that credential, the password, was actually stolen and used, not authorized to be used, etc. So the threat is real, and it's real expensive. So, taking advantage of weak passwords, billions of dollars are being lost, etc. We can pull up a range of incidents that have occurred where there have been severe loss of data, information, penalties, etc. And whilst moving to passwords in a zero trust paradigm is the best way to deal with that, I do want to point out here on this previous slide that it doesn't solve all of the problems. It will severely reduce the fact that you may be compromised by moving to certificates, because that's the best thing that we can do. But once you move to certificates, if you don't manage those certificates appropriately, then certificates that expire when you weren't expecting can leave your organization or the service that you're providing vulnerable to attackers. Or if the keys for the certificate weren't managed correctly or were used for too long, because PKI is fantastic. It's been around for a long time and has stood the test of time in protecting organizations' data and providing digital services, etc. But it's not immune if the implementation and the way in which it's managed is not handled. There have been actually very few breaches of data that were protected by public key infrastructure, which that's what I mean by PKI, because of the actual protocol itself or the crypto. Typically, where systems have been protected by PKI have been compromised, it's because the keys weren't managed appropriately, or there was a human failing in the binding of the keys to the service or the individual or device that it's representing. So, folks, if we can just stay on mute. So again, moving to passwordless, moving away from passwords is critical to ensuring that in this complex environment in which we're operating, ensures that we're going to close a massive hole. Like I said, more than 50% of compromises, somewhere close to 60% of compromises are as a result of a password. And so moving to something like certificates will close a massive hole, but it doesn't close the entire hole. You still, once you've moved to PKI credentials, you still need to make sure that those credentials get managed correctly to ensure that, the investment that you make in moving away from passwords to something that's stronger is actually complete in that you have appropriate management of keys and certificates over their life cycle. And that's more or less the suite of services that we want to talk about today. So if you're using certificates, great. But because of the complexity of the hyperconnectivity that we're dealing with in today's world, we then need to make sure that we're using the right technology. So we've moved away from password to certs, great. But now we need to make sure that in all the places where certs are used, that they're actually being managed appropriately. And so, like I said, it's common for folks to make sure, because of rigorous guidelines and requirements in, say, the web PKI, that maybe certificates there are managed correctly or rigorously because browsers enforce that, etc. But in other parts where you may be using PKI internally now, like at your firewalls or your web application firewalls, your load balancers, APIs, etc., the containers that you might be placing to run services in your virtualized environment with your cloud service providers, etc. All of these things also use certificates. And sometimes it's easy to forget that certificates are being used there because they're fantastic for security. And sometimes we forget to actually manage those certificates as well, because maybe they're not as visible as they need. Now, one of the other things that we should take into consideration also is that there is a movement in the certificate world away from longer lived keys, because the more that a key, the private key associated with the public key that's embedded in the digital certificate, the more that that private key is used, then there is a potential for the more use creates greater exposure, and then that key over time degrades in its security. So you should only use them for a certain lifetime, which is generally why certificates have a specific period of validity. And you should only honor that certificate for that period, and then after that time, you should change or rotate keys or update certificates, etc. And so that how long that key is being used does have an impact on the strength of security that the PKI or the certificate could be actually providing for you. And so there is a general trend in communications, in protocols that are protecting our infrastructure, to move to shorter and shorter lifetimes on the certificate, because as compute power expands, specifically with the threat of a quantum computer arriving anytime in the next few years, then some of the traditional PKI and cryptographic mechanisms that we rely upon are not going to be immune to quantum computing. And so the advent of quantum computing on the horizon and the use of keys for a long time, there's a general movement away from long-lived keys to shorter keys. And so a certificate which may be on a normal basis might be, you update it once a year. So, you just need to set yourself a reminder before the certificate expires to make sure you go update that. And you have to do that once a year. Well, that might be manageable in a manual process. But if we're finding that because of the advent of technology or regulations that may be forced upon us, because of compute power and the exposure that the keys have, that you, instead of having to replace your certificate once a year, what if you have to replace it once a month? Then something where it might be very doable from a manual process to stay on top of keeping your certificates up to date is no longer really viable for a lot of moderate-sized organizations to be able to manage their number of certificates that they're using and have to update them so much on a regular basis. And therefore, you need to start looking towards a process that is as automated as possible to take away the potential threat of somebody forgetting that a particular credential needed to be updated on time, etc. And so to deal with that complexity, you actually need a suite of services to help you with that. But today we're going to talk about one in particular. It's there on the left-hand side of this slide, the certificate lifecycle management piece. And so eMudhra in the product stack has a number of in the product suite have a number of applications and services to support the whole process, whether related to PKI. It could be the PKI in the enterprise. It could be trust services where you need national or global or community recognition. You could be relying on something run internal to your organization, that's your enterprise PKI, or you could be relying on external PKIs that are managed by a different entity. And so all these different modes of ways which certificates might be consumed by an organization need to be managed in the sense that I was saying earlier, in terms of making sure that certificates aren't expiring and creating a problem for you, that when one has been compromised, that you have a very easy single place to go, that you know that you can request the appropriate revocation of that credential and replacement of that as things move to faster and shorter key periods to reduce the risk of exposure of the private key, a place where you can go to automate these things. And that's where the certificate lifecycle management comes in. And that's what we're going to talk on today, the CertiNext service that allows us to manage key and certificate life cycles. So with the set of suites that we're talking about that eMudhra has in regards to trust services, there are four main ones, but we're focused really on CertiNext. And so, my mouse is not, there you go. So CertiNext, that's where we're going to deal with key and certificate management. So discovery of where your keys are, discovery of where your certificates are, and then being able to bring them into a single place where they can be managed and verified in terms of whether the implementation is right, or whether there may need to be some adjustments to supported algorithms, etc., to allow auto provisioning. So as I mentioned, something that might be manageable, maybe renew my certificate once a year, might be able to be done manually. But if that comes down to a couple of months or even 1 month or even shorter, then you really need to be focused on something that's going to provide auto provisioning, because the manual resources to do that will become a burden for even moderate sized organizations. And then to ensure that the way in which in hybrid environments that we're working with, we're typically working with containerized solutions, and you need to make sure that they by default have an implementation of PKI using certificates, etc. But folks often forget that these two also have to be managed. So making sure that you're discovering where all the certificates are, that they need to be managed, and having a mechanism to do that is really the topic of what we're talking about today. So the product that we're talking about is called CertiNext. It's a certificate lifecycle management service. So, the purpose of CertiNext is to facilitate, we can do both manual, but automated really is the focus, management of keys and certificates. And they could either be private or public trust or through a third party, it doesn't matter. And that will facilitate use cases across the full spectrum of trust services, whether it's for users or applications, networking appliances, or connected devices. So CertiNext manages the life cycle of digital certificates and keys, because oftentimes you can also have just raw keys that need to be managed as well for securing your infrastructure. So there are a lot of places, as I mentioned earlier, where certificates are used. Some places are very visible, and it's easy to be reminded of those because they're very visible. But there's a lot of places in our infrastructure now, which is a complex infrastructure across hybrid environments, that we also need to figure out, what is our exposure there in terms of where certificates are being used, how long they're being used for, when was the last time that they were updated, when are they going to expire, when do they need to be renewed. And having a catalog of those is going to be really important. So even if you've moved everything away from password-based authentication to certificates, you still have to manage those certificates in a way to ensure that the enterprise is being protected. So maintaining the inventory of certificates, discovering when certificates are going to expire, checking for vulnerabilities in the certificates, renewing them automatically, and then reprovisioning automatically are the key points that CertiNext provides. How does CertiNext do that? Well, it is it's like a Swiss Army knife in terms of managing certs. The capabilities that have been built into CertiNext are the best, bar none, that are out there. So I've been working in this industry, as Jishnu indicated, for almost 3 decades now, and CertiNext, in terms of certificate lifecycle management, is one of the best products that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Might be a bit biased now because I actually a representative of eMudhra, but I have also been in the past a client of eMudhra, and I've been very impressed with the quality of the products that have been produced, and CertiNext certainly fits into that category. So if we look at the capabilities, there is a stack there in the middle of the page, or the middle of this slide, which talks about, the capabilities of the certificate lifecycle management. You can do request certificates, you can issue certificates, you have workflows, custom workflows that you can implement. You have different types of certificates that can be supported. Guys, just a reminder, if we can just remember to keep your mics on mute during the presentation. And then various broad capabilities support different protocols. So looking on the left-hand side of the slide here, there are lots of different types of devices that can be supported. Your PKI may need to support certificates that are running on-prem or in a cloud environment. So access to those servers. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. So we support our servers, whether they're running in a cloud environment or whether they run on-prem. So provisioning and automating the update of the certificates for those type of servers is supported by CertiNext. Load balancers and firewalls are supported automatically. Hardware security modules, where keys are stored, are also supported. We have the ability to do a discovery process where we scan those servers and those load balancers and firewalls and hardware security modules to find where certificates and keys are that need to be managed. And once we find them, then CertiNext can actually start to manage those certificates through either a manual process or through workflows or some automated process. So the way in which we do that is you can configure templates that you're going to work off. Now, working with a template ensures that you have consistency across your organization in the way and how long the certificates are going to be valid for, the structure of the certificates, what algorithms and crypto they're going to support, etc. Having templates to enforce this ensures that you have consistency across the many parts of the hybrid environment that you're working in that you might need to be supporting. And then you can deploy templates to automatically update IIS servers, Tomcat web servers in Kubernetes, or you can have a manual process, or there can actually be client, we will call it a little piece of code, an agent is what the word I'm looking for, an agent that actually runs to actually provide automated updates for a lot of other services or servers that are requiring keys to be updated. And all of those things means that through the command line or through the GUI that CertiNext provides, that you can manage requests, issue certificates, and update directly the service that needs the updated certificates. On the right-hand side of the capabilities here of CertiNext, there are a number of different protocols that are supported. So the ACME protocol or SCEP, SCEP's fairly, ACME was something that was developed more for the web PKI, but it's being modified and expanded for other use cases. SCEP is the protocol that's typically used in environments where there's constrained computing, maybe it's IoT, but also SCEP is generally the protocol, enrollment protocol used in a Microsoft environment. So if you're running Active Directory or something along those lines, then it's typically using SCEP to manage certificates. So that's another way that you can plug in to existing infrastructure and be able to manage them directly through your interface, and then it goes out and updates what's required in the Microsoft PKI through SCEP, for instance. Then EST and CMP are two other more rigorous ways of doing enrollment and management of certificates and keys. So moving down a little bit, what types of certificates can be managed? Well, they can be your SSL or your TLS certificates, whether they're publicly trusted or privately trusted. They could be individual certificates representing identity of an individual, or maybe for document signing, or SMIME for protecting email certificates, or it could actually be a custom certificate profile. All of these can be facilitated within CertiNext for how you want to provision in terms of the types of certificates that can be used through the protocols that I just mentioned before. So in terms of workflow, there is a very powerful workflow engine that allows you to make customized workflows for your organization in terms of how you want and who you want to approve, what steps needs to be taken within an organization to approve the issuance of certificates. So there's capabilities for validating certain things in terms of publicly trusted entities. There's organization validating that needs to go into certain types of TLS certificates, and you can do pre-validation of that so that you can then automate organizational certificates rather than certificates only at a domain validation level. There is, as part of the validation process, one of the things that we call linting. Linting is where you can specify that you want to make sure that various aspects of a certificate that's being issued are actually in the credential itself. So when it's created, you want to make sure it has the right extensions in there. You want to make sure that things that were maybe excluded or should it be in the certificate are not there, etc. So it's more like a validation check against the certificate. And linting can be run prior to the certificate being produced or even after the certificate has been produced to make sure that it conforms to the template that you've specified. And then, there are other capabilities to plug into database-based, risk-based evaluation. So if a certificate may be for your organization's request and it doesn't fall within a boundary that you've set, or maybe there is a particular class of credential that you don't want a provision for because it represents too much risk, you can actually specify these in the workflows to make sure that you never actually end up issuing any of those, and thus reducing your potential risk for having a misissuance. So there's lots of different ways that these can be facilitated. The credentials don't need to come just from of course, because eMudhra provides a suite of trust services, the CertiNext is plugged into our MCA, which is our CA platform, but it's also plugged into mSign. mSign is our software as a service, or PKI as a service for publicly trusted certificates. So you can go with CertiNext to Hub, which is our portal for requesting publicly trusted certificates. It can plug into that. so that you can provision certificates that are recognized in the browser or under any of our mSign trust routes, which are embedded in browsers and operating systems, all the major browsers and operating systems. Or it could plug into a hosted PKI somewhere, and it doesn't even need to be your hosted PKI. It could be somebody's PKI, as long as the appropriate APIs are available for making the requests and the issuance of certificates. For instance, one common hosted PKI could be ACME, the ACME protocol. So you could request via ACME there are a number of ACME providers now in the public trust space. eMudhra is one of them, but there are other providers that you could also request certificates through. So it plugs in through ACME to request any custom route that you might have. And then, of course, any private on-prem PKI. So that could be MCA, as I mentioned earlier, but it could also be something like a Microsoft CA, and you could use CertiNext to control and manage the way in which certificates issued by your Microsoft environment are managed, updated, and see everything through a single interface. So what are the key highlights here? Well, eMudhra is the only Indian public CA with full browser coverage on global recognition. You can renew certs and keys using public or private, and we support a full range of protocols, whether it's TLS, SMIME, or IoT, and we can do auto provisioning of certificates across the widest range possible with CertiNext. So what's included? So we're going to go through a little bit. I want to leave some time for some questions at the end, but we'll go through some of the interfaces that you'll get in CertiNext. I do want to talk about some of the use cases that we have for CertiNext, but basically you have the ability to discover and then put under management any certificate from a wide variety of sources to be managed and automated within your environment. And that could also be publicly trusted TLS certificates as well. So there are a number of use cases identified. I'm going to skip over those for now and just talk about some of the key features of CertiNext. So CertiNext supports a broad range of engagement models. It could be done as software as a service, or it could be in a dedicated cloud, or it could be done on-prem. It supports multiple PKIs, so it could be under mSign, it could be publicly trusted, it could be a hosted PKI on-prem, as we talked about previously. It has automation capabilities, so to discover certificates that you may not even know about, and we'll talk about some of those capabilities, and a very broad protocol support for how certificates are going to be managed. There's a workflow management in there, and as I mentioned earlier, doing through certificate profiles ensures that you have tighter controls and consistency across the way in which your certificates can be managed. There are a comprehensive set of APIs that allows this to occur. There are very easy to use validation mechanisms. It supports a broad range of environments that you might be operating in, and the good thing about all quality security software, it should be controlled by policy. So at a policy, you can set policy, and then the actual implementation conforms to the policy. So it's a policy-based implementation engine. There is a GUI for managing who can access this. It's full-featured. You can set roles and specify who has access and who might have the responsibility to perform certain functions within the system. You can manage stock if you have an account with a provider. You can manage how different groups who might have access to certificates that might be issued, and you can set limits if that's what you want to do. It gives you a broad flexibility in how you want to provision and divide up the responsibilities within an organization. It has a full set of tamper-proof audit logs, and then lots of reports that you can actually use to tell you about what's going on. We've talked a lot about certificates, but CertiNext also provides key management features. I'm not focusing so much on the KMS today, but you can generate and manage raw keys in the organization as well, so those that may not be associated with digital certificates. Now, the great thing about it is CertiNext caters to a broad, a hybrid environment, so you can scan certificates. That can be done across your Active Directory. It can be done across your user machines in an organization, and if your web servers or SSH servers, to get an inventory of what needs to be managed. And then you can schedule things like issuance of certs, how often you want to do that scan, etc., and how often you need to update the information. You can do a vulnerability assessment of the keys and certificates that are being used, and I'll show you a little bit about that interface a little bit later on. You can do secure key management, and so making sure that the keys that are being used are generated in a strong and secure way. And again, once you have that inventory in place, you can then via APIs provision those certificates and plug everything into a hardware security module to give you the appropriate protection of any keys that you're managing. This is an example of a dashboard that you will get within CertiNext. You can see here under certificate management and key management, you've got your tab down the left-hand side of your menus, etc. And so we're looking at certificate statistics here, and you can see on the initial dashboard that in this particular implementation that the scanning has revealed 48 endpoints. You can see that 190 of them are being protected by CertiNext, and there are 80 that aren't, and you can choose whether you want to put them on. And it also lets you know that of the keys and certs that have been scanned, it's found that 30 of them have potential vulnerabilities, which is, this is a great dashboard to have, so you can very quickly focus in on perhaps where you need to which certificates need attention first. Those that might have vulnerability obviously would fall into that category. So in the discovery case, you can discover by host name or IP address. You can set a range, and the agent goes out in your network and will search for different types of keys and certificates, and you can specify how often that discovery mechanism runs. Scheduling this to kick off as often as you think it's necessary in your organization. Maybe you want to do it once a week, maybe you want to do it once a day, but you can specify how often it runs. You can specify which areas of your network you want to focus on to try to discover whether there's any new ones, keeping in mind that once you run it, you will be given a report of certificates and keys that you are then able to manage. You choose whether you want to manage them with CertiNext or not. But if you do want to manage them, then they will be in the inventory, and you could run another scan and then determine whether that service is still running or not, and whether it still needs to be managed, etc. But you have a very flexible mechanism for how you want to partition your discovery, so that you know which parts of your network, whether it's internal, partners, cloud, etc., that you're running the discovery on, to determine where you might have certificates that need to be managed. It's a very powerful engine. Once you have done the discovery, then you can bring them into management, and you can say, look, for this certificate, it says where it was found, how long it's valid for, what type of certificate was, who the issuer is, and then you have the ability to do a revoke or rotate keys or suspend, or there's a broad range of capabilities that you can do on the certificate. You can renew it, you can reprovision, and you can push it back out to the server. Now, it's necessary to create connectors, for instance, to different CAs. Maybe you want to connect to Let's Encrypt, who is a publicly trusted DV issuing for TLS certificates, issuer for TLS certificates. You could connect to Let's Encrypt, or you could connect to mSign Hub, which is eMudhra's PKI as a service with our publicly trusted certs. You could do a private PKI, like I mentioned before, with MCA, or it could be the Microsoft PKI that you're connecting to and making requests for certificates out of the Active Directory certificate service. There are a broad range of other connectors to other publicly trusted CAs as well that are available out of the box. And one of the settings that you set is which ones do you want to connect to. So if you've in your discovery, you find that some of your certs are being provisioned by Let's Encrypt, say, then they can continue to be managed by Let's Encrypt. They don't have to be managed specifically by other eMudhra services. You can also manage keys in the same way. Again, in this presentation, I'm not focused so much on the key management aspect of CertiNext. I just want to let folks know that it's there, but you have the capability of managing keys in the environment, keeping in mind that raw keys typically used for things like SSH at the system admin level are important. Also, that they're not used for too long, that they're generated in the right way, and that whoever has access to them, that access is updated. Maybe that individual's no longer in the organization and control of that needs to pass to somebody else, but keeping track of those is also capable through CertiNext. So one way that you specify there is the key profiles. It could be typically in a hardware security module, or it could be generated in software, etc. Again, very flexible interface toward determining how you want to create and manage keys. One of the great features about CertiNext is you have the ability to have what we call our vulnerability results. So once you've found keys or certificates, then there is a scanner that we check to make sure whether the right algorithms are being used, whether the service is configured correctly with names in constraints like the subject alternative name, whether the chain is valid, whether the certificate is within its validity period, whether it's subject to certain well-known attacks that because of either key size or algorithm or how long it's been out there, etc. And having this vulnerability report is fantastic because, again, it allows you to very quickly, once you've discovered where the certificates are, allows you to know which ones you need to work on immediately that might be exposing some of your risk. So I talked earlier about, for zero trust, in the paradigm of zero trust, where you want to do identity, it's important to get away from passwords. So moving to certificates is the best thing that you can do. But once you move to certificates, then there are some other challenges that you need to deal with. So, for instance, are those certificates configured correctly? Have they making sure they're not expiring without folks managing those? As you get shorter and shorter lifetimes, being able to automate a lot of that process. These are the types of things that CertiNext helps you with. And there is a complex set of APIs and supported network devices that are supported out of the box that it can help you with. And then in terms of data at risk is typically where the key management comes into. But again, I'm defocused on this particular presentation of that. So one case study that I'll talk briefly about, there was a large public sector bank wanting to implement its zero trust security framework with eMudhra. And so we helped that bank to move away from password-based to go passwordless using PKI. And of course, in doing so, because their user base is actually over 550 million users who are connecting on a regular basis, then you need something that's very robust that can scale. And so one of the things that this particular use case required, the bank required, was that there was a need to support 35,000 authentications per second. And of course, the solution implemented by eMudhra with CertiNext and our Secure Pass meet those requirements. So not only are you getting with CertiNext, not only do you get an extremely full-featured product that meets a broad range of capabilities, but it also is robust in how well it can scale to any size organization. Now, the great thing about this particular implementation is we improve security, compliance, and operational efficiency. So severely reducing the risk for that bank for future cybersecurity challenges. Who are our clients in this place? We have a broad range of clients utilizing our services, but it's not just the clients that we have. We have a strong team who's been in this space and doing cybersecurity for a long time. And so that experience gets rolled into the types of products and services that we work on and release to our partners and clients. And we operate in many industry working groups and subscribe to and adhere to many trust frameworks, so that the products and services that we provide automatically give compliance or facilitate easy compliance where that might be required by your particular industry. Then a little bit about eMudhra. I think folks know we've been around for since 2008, so 15, 16 years now. There's about 800, 900 employees spread across 10 offices around the globe, and we are operating services. Actually, I think it's more than 30. I think it's 40 plus countries now. The product itself is backed by a team and experience that basically should fill anyone with confidence to know that they are engaging the right partner. And with that, I will take. Thanks, guys.